When a woman starts pulling away, most men feel it long before they can explain it. Replies slow down. Conversations lose their depth. The warmth that once felt effortless becomes inconsistent. Nothing dramatic happens, yet everything feels different. A quiet distance appears where closeness used to live, and that silence creates anxiety because it feels unfinished. This is the moment where almost every man makes the same mistake. He tries to fix it. He explains more, reassures more, invests more. He believes effort will restore connection. But what he does not realize is that this reaction often turns temporary distance into permanent loss. Pulling away is rarely rejection. More often, it is emotional repositioning. It happens when attraction begins to feel predictable, when emotional access feels guaranteed, or when closeness removes curiosity. Her nervous system creates space not to escape, but to regain balance, clarity, or control. What happens next determines everything. When a man chases that space, he proves emotional dependence. When he collapses internally, certainty returns, and certainty quietly kills attraction. Regret does not come from being pursued. It comes from contrast. This moment is not a crisis. It is a test, not of tactics, but of emotional grounding. And the way you respond to this distance will decide whether respect grows, regret forms, or the connection ends without meaning. When a woman starts pulling away, most men immediately interpret it as attraction fading. They assume interest is dying or that something has already gone wrong. That assumption creates urgency, and urgency is what quietly finishes what distance merely started. In reality, pulling away is rarely the absence of attraction. More often, it is the presence of emotional overload. Attraction creates vulnerability, and vulnerability creates a loss of internal control. When emotional access feels too available or too predictable, the nervous system seeks balance. Pulling away becomes a way to regulate emotions, not to end connection. This is why distance often appears right after moments of closeness. When curiosity is replaced by certainty, the mind stops engaging. Emotional safety increases, but attraction depends on engagement, not comfort alone. Most men believe attraction should grow steadily and continuously. Human psychology does not work that way. Attraction moves in waves, not straight lines. The mistake men make is responding to distance with effort. They try to close the emotional gap, believing reassurance will stabilize the connection. But reassurance removes uncertainty. And uncertainty is the fuel of attraction. When uncertainty disappears, attraction collapses quietly rather than dramatically. Distance only becomes permanent when it is chased. Pulling away turns into loss when a man reacts emotionally and tries to restore control. That reaction confirms emotional access still exists. Certainty returns, and once certainty is restored, there is nothing left for attraction to grow into. Men who experience women pulling away and then returning are not luckier or more skilled. They simply did not collapse internally when distance appeared. Their emotional center stayed intact, and that stability creates contrast. Contrast is where reflection begins, and reflection is where regret is born. When she starts pulling away, the most damaging mistake a man can make is reacting emotionally to the distance. Not because emotion itself is wrong, but because reaction reveals dependence. And dependence is felt immediately, even when nothing obvious is said or done. Most men believe chasing is the real mistake. In reality, chasing is only the visible symptom. The real damage happens internally the moment a man allows her withdrawal to disturb his emotional balance. Regret can only form when loss feels real. Loss does not feel real if emotional access is still available. This is why reassurance is so destructive during moments of distance. When a man tries to explain, comfort, or stabilize the connection, he signals that her pulling away affected him. That signal restores certainty. Certainty tells her nervous system that nothing meaningful was lost. Once certainty returns, the mind closes the loop. There is nothing to question, nothing to reflect on, and nothing to regret. Another reaction that quietly kills regret is emotional transparency at the wrong time. Many men feel the urge to express their feelings to be honest or to clear confusion. They believe clarity creates connection. Psychologically, clarity at this stage removes tension before it has done its work. Tension is what gives absence meaning. Some men attempt the opposite and become cold or distant on purpose. This also fails. Performative detachment feels reactive and defensive. It communicates wounded pride, not emotional strength. The men who create regret do not try to provoke emotion. They remain internally consistent. Their emotional state does not rise with closeness or fall with distance. That steadiness removes control without creating conflict, and without control, reflection begins. Most men believe regret grows simply because they disappear. They assume that if they stay silent long enough, distance itself will do the work. In reality, silence by itself creates nothing. Empty silence feels passive, and passive absence does not produce regret. It produces indifference. Regret only grows when absence is paired with visible continuity. When a woman pulls away and senses that your life did not slow down, shrink, or reorganize around her absence, something subtle begins to shift. Your absence stops feeling like strategy and starts feeling like movement. This distinction matters more than most men realize. Silence that feels like waiting communicates attachment. Silence that feels like forward motion communicates independence. Only the second one creates reflection. Reflection is where regret begins. Regret does not come from missing you. It comes from realizing you did not need her in order to continue. Many men sabotage this process without realizing it. They remain physically silent but emotionally present. They check social media, look for signals, or wait for reaction. Even indirect attention communicates availability. Availability collapses reflection because emotional access never truly disappears. Another common mistake is using silence as punishment. That creates resistance, not regret. Resistance makes the mind defensive, and defensive minds justify instead of reflect. Regret only forms in emotional neutrality, where there is no pressure, no explanation, and no emotional pursuit. Silence must be supported by emotional self-direction. Your energy has to be invested elsewhere in a way that feels natural, not forced. When absence feels like consequence instead of control, her pullback loses power. It stops feeling like authority and starts feeling like loss. And quiet loss is what slowly turns reflection into regret. Regret rarely announces itself clearly. It does not arrive as an apology, a confession, or a dramatic return. Most of the time, it shows up quietly as curiosity, a casual message, a simple check-in, a reason to reconnect that feels incomplete or unnecessary. This is the moment where regret begins turning into action, and it is where most men make their next mistake. When she reaches out after pulling away, many men assume the process is complete. They believe attraction has returned and now needs to be secured. That assumption triggers urgency. Urgency is what collapses regret before it finishes forming. Regret only has power while it remains unresolved. When a man responds with emotional enthusiasm, relief, or eagerness, he resolves the tension too quickly. He gives emotional access before she has fully processed the loss. That access removes discomfort, and discomfort is the engine of regret. In trying to be warm and receptive, he unintentionally comforts her out of the very feeling that brought her back. A high-value response in this moment is not cold, and it is not intense. It is steady. Interest is present, but it does not spike. The emotional posture remains calm and grounded. There is no rush to define the interaction or move it toward resolution. This creates psychological pressure in the right direction. Her internal question stays open. She feels the pull to move closer, not because she is being persuaded, but because the absence of certainty keeps working on her. Most men are afraid of this space because it feels risky. In reality, rushing to close it is what ends the opportunity. Regret turns into action only when it is allowed to breathe. Once regret begins turning into action, most men believe their role is to keep it alive. They start monitoring behavior, reading signals, and adjusting themselves to maintain momentum. This is where regret either matures into something real or collapses back into another unstable cycle. The difference is not effort, it is posture. Regret turns into commitment only when it meets emotional stability over time. Not intensity, not reassurance. Stability. The kind that does not change because she moves closer or farther away. Most men fail here because they confuse progress with acceleration. When she starts showing interest again, they increase emotional investment. They text more. They initiate more. They begin prioritizing her presence again. And without realizing it, they remove the contrast that made regret possible in the first place. Contrast must be maintained quietly. A grounded man does not reduce interest, but he does not increase it either. His attention remains intentional. His availability remains selective. His emotional center stays anchored in his own direction, not in managing the dynamic. When she senses that closeness does not control you, something important happens. She no longer feels safe drifting away without consequence, but she also does not feel pressured to decide quickly. The connection becomes real instead of reactive. Many men invite repeated cycles because they reward regret with urgency. They treat her return as proof that everything is resolved. But regret is not resolution. It is reassessment. Reassessment requires time. Holding your position allows behavior to reveal intention naturally. In doing so, commitment either forms honestly or the dynamic ends cleanly without costing you your self-respect. One of the most misunderstood moments happens after regret has already surfaced. She reached out, she showed curiosity, she tested emotional access, and then, unexpectedly, she pulls away again. For most men, this feels like confirmation that everything failed. In reality, this moment often means the opposite. When regret begins turning into real emotional movement, vulnerability increases. Vulnerability creates internal pressure, and pressure often causes the nervous system to pause. Pulling away again is frequently a form of regulation, not rejection. It is the mind slowing down to regain balance before committing to a new emotional position. Most men fail here because they interpret distance emotionally instead of structurally. They assume the pullback means they did something wrong. They try to repair it. They re-engage emotionally. They seek reassurance. And the moment they do, they collapse the entire process. Regret only deepens when it remains unresolved. When you rush to relieve her discomfort, you remove the tension that was moving her closer. A grounded man does not punish this pullback, but he does not chase it either. His emotional posture remains exactly where it was when regret first appeared. Calm, consistent, forward-moving, this consistency is critical. When she pulls away again and finds that nothing shifted in you, the internal question returns with greater weight. Did I misjudge him? Did I lose access to something stable? Did my absence matter more than I expected? Those questions cannot form if you react. Distance only reveals what is strong enough to exist without management. When you stop reacting to pullbacks, they stop controlling the dynamic. Everything discussed so far comes down to one rule that most men understand intellectually, but rarely live by emotionally. Regret only forms when emotional access disappears and is not replaced by reaction. Most men believe regret is something they must create in someone else. In reality, regret forms when control quietly disappears. When a woman realizes that her distance did not destabilize you, something changes internally. Her pullback did not stop your momentum. Your emotional center did not collapse. Your life did not pause or reorient around her behavior. This realization creates psychological asymmetry. She begins revisiting the dynamic not because you disappeared, but because you remained whole. This cannot be faked. If you pull away hoping for a reaction, regret will never form. The moment she senses that your emotional center is still oriented toward her, certainty returns. And certainty erases regret before it has time to develop. High-value men do not create regret through silence, mystery, or distance. They create it through emotional invariance. Their emotional state does not rise with closeness or fall with distance. That steadiness forces reflection. Reflection turns into discomfort. Discomfort turns into action. Action turns into either genuine investment or clean separation. Both outcomes are power. Commitment formed through emotional independence is real. Separation formed without chasing preserves self-respect. This is why the goal was never to make her regret losing you. The goal was to stop losing yourself when she pulled away. When that happens, regret either appears naturally or becomes irrelevant. And that is the moment you stop being controlled by attraction dynamics entirely.